Paris has been in the headlines for the past couple of weeks, and chances are you haven't even heard of another dateline, Baga, which has seen far more bloodshed than the French capital. Baga is in northeastern Nigeria. It's been under constant attack ever since January 3rd by the militant group Boko Haram. The death toll varies depending on the source. Some news organizations put it as high as 2,000. The Nigerian military has it at about 150. And that encapsulates the problem with covering this story. Very little is verifiable because much of that corner of the country is under Boko Haram's control. Our only real window into the devastation comes from satellite imagery because the region is inaccessible to the authorities, let alone the media. The internet is also inaccessible. Mobile phones haven't worked there for months, so social media has no way to report what is happening. Northeastern Nigeria is a black hole for information, which is one of the reasons why this story is not getting the coverage it deserves. Another, according to his critics, is the government of President Goodluck Jonathan, who has an election to fight, doesn't want Boko Haram setting the agenda, and therefore doesn't want to spend time talking to journalists about the group. Our starting point this week is the capital, Abuja.
It took Boko Haram 17 days to make a claim most everyone knew was coming, that it was responsible for the carnage in Baga. What we still do not know, more than 3 weeks after the killing spree began, is how many have perished. And it boils down to the most fundamental of journalistic requirements: access.
We need to understand how the media industry works in Nigeria. A majority of them are operating out of Lagos. So the point remains that most of them do not have operations outside of Lagos. You understand that Boko Haram is in the remotest part of the country, in the northern Nigeria, where much of the media are absent. And if we are absent, then what we get will be either half-truth or no truth at all.
Accurate information comes out very slowly, and the problem is that we have inaccurate information which is coming out initially, and we all know that what people hear first is what they'll remember. So if you have a figure such as 2,000 being bandied around, that's the figure that will remain, as opposed to the official figure which was released by the Nigerian military, which was around 150.
And you also remember that Nigerian journalists are not among the best paid, even in West Africa. Nigerian journalists don't have insurance. If a journalist dies while covering anything, in our local parlance here, we will say that he is on his own. That is OYO, on your own. And Boko Haram is not your regular army. They delight in killing journalists. They have attacked media houses. They have killed journalists. So nobody wants to stay there.
4 Nigerian journalists have been killed since Boko Haram came to prominence 5 years ago. Only one of those deaths has been blamed on the militants, but Boko Haram did target the media in 2012 when it launched strikes on 3 newspapers: This Day, The Sun, and The Moment. The chilling effect of those attacks and the remoteness of the story partly explain the lack of domestic coverage. And like anywhere else, if the local media are not there to report, the international media, which depend on local journalists, suffer from a lack of facts as well.
I think a factor is our shrinking commitment to foreign journalism and to foreign correspondence as well. And I think Africa especially is hardest hit by that. So many media outlets are scaling back on their Africa coverage. We have a lot of media outlets that might have one person assigned to the entire West Africa region, or one person assigned to the entire continent.
How can they be stopped?
News organizations and other interested parties, aid workers and NGOs have tried to piece together the story from afar through technology and their powers of deduction. Amnesty International says it examined satellite images before calling the attack Boko Haram's deadliest yet. And when a local government official estimated the death toll at 2,000, that figure proved contentious and politically charged.
What people do is that they base their reportage on hearsay or on whatever somebody who was there was able to, to tell them. And some people say that the Nigerian army was trying to downplay on the figure so that they don't give the impression that Boko Haram is winning the war. But we can never be sure what really happened.
Not too long after those numbers came out, various members of Nigeria's incumbent political party immediately came out on social media to discredit those numbers and made it into a partisan issue, which is quite an unfortunate feature of how Boko Haram has been politicized in Nigeria.
And then, of course, we have an election going on. The ruling party is convinced that the opposition wants to make them look bad by all means, and that they will latch onto any bad news. So there is this distrust.
And a lack of hard information from on-the-ground reporting feeds the uncertainty and confusion. 9 months ago, when more than 200 schoolgirls in the town of Chibok were kidnapped by Boko Haram, President Jonathan did not speak publicly about the crisis for 2 weeks. The ensuing criticism did not end when the president insisted he had remained silent for fear of compromising the negotiations. And 2 months later, his government signed a $1.2 million contract with a public relations firm based in Washington, the primary objective of which was to change the media narrative on the Boko Haram story. And a government clearly concerned with the narrative and its image last year is now less than a month away from national elections, which threaten to preoccupy politicians and the reporters covering them.
The media is concerned about the elections more than they're concerned about anything else going on in Nigeria right now. The politicians are concerned about winning the elections. Everybody who has a stake in who wins the election is concerned. So these are issues that are being magnified in the minds of Nigerians more than anything else happening in, according to some people, some remote corner of our country. Because people see it as some faraway place.
And a problem that we have here in Nigeria also is skepticism. Many people didn't even believe that the Chibok girls had gone missing. So there's definitely a large divide amongst Nigerians here, and that comes from political divides, that comes from religious divides, that comes from cultural divides in a country of over 170 million people.
The fighting in Nigeria is a big story, and when it fails to attract the kind of coverage its importance merits, there is a reflexive blaming of the international media and accusations of double editorial standards. Look more closely at what's behind that lack of ink or airtime, though, and you will find that Nigeria's coverage problem starts at home.
Whether the world paid attention to Nigeria or not is not really my concern. I'm more concerned about the fact that right here, we're not as bothered as we should be. I'm more concerned about the fact that our own media doesn't think it's important enough to make this headline news. They would rather report what some politician has said and what he has promised to do that politicians have promised over the past 10 years.
Who do we blame for that? Are we going to blame the media organizations who are not based there for not sending their reporters to come and cover Baga for us? Or are we going to blame ourselves for not going out there ourselves? They lack the resources. They lack the support. But wait a minute. What did our own government do when Baga happened? I'm going to be silent for 1 second. That's what they did. They were silent. And how do you cover silence? How do they expect our journalists to cover silence?
On the download this week, our viewers on the difficulty of covering the Boko Haram story in Nigeria.
One of the reasons the massacre was downplayed in the Western media is part of a broader problem that the Western media has when depicting news from Africa in particular. So often the case is that the only narrative it's familiar with when it comes to Africa is that of violence and destruction. When events like those that happen at Baga take place, I think there's almost a sense of fatigue in that, how can it provide a fresh take on something that seems so familiar?
We saw what happened in Paris, 70 people died. There was that global sentiment of sympathy compared to Nigeria, where you had at least 150 or even 2,000 people passed away. There was that international neglect by the media, and we know why. There's still that sentiment that is anti-African racial formation, anti-African blackness.